Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Keith McNamara. I'm Deputy Director for Housing and Environment within Perth and Kinross Council, and I'll be hopefully guiding you through proceedings this evening. I'm delighted to welcome residents as well as elected members here tonight. This is one of several meetings we're having in relation to the flooding events of 11th and 12th of August, and tonight we're talking about the area affected by the Craigie Burn. We're also very pleased to have representatives from the following organisations: from Perth and Kinross Council, the Scottish Flood Forum, and I think we're maybe a wee technical issue, but I think we might be joined by a colleague from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service as well, so might just bear with our colleagues on that one until we can get the technology sorted out. We're living obviously in very difficult and challenging times, and this is reflected in the way that we're carrying out this meeting. Usually we would have these kind of meetings on a face-to-face basis. However, social distancing is preventing us from doing so. So this is the fifth in a series of meetings we're having, so colleagues are getting used to the new and unusual format, and hopefully we can guide you through as to how we deal with this format, and hopefully you'll feel comfortable in being able to put any questions or comments to us, hearing what the presentations are, and then having as good a dialogue as we can in this virtual world that we're inhabiting tonight. So, as I said, we're here to talk about the significant storm and flooding events of the 11th of 12th of August, which impacted on many people and many areas of the council. And there's been multiple instances of flooding right across Scotland, but also within Perth and Kinross area. I'm sure colleagues will cover this later, but we did have the experience something like a month and a half's rainfall over a 6-hour period, and that really caused major issues across Perth and Kinross. So we want to learn about what happened and why, and probably the main thing is what we can do together to minimise the impact of any future flooding event. So that's really the purpose, and if we're here to answer any questions that residents or elected members have. So if you'll indulge with me, I'm not planning to introduce everyone on the call because that would take up a substantial part of your evening. So I will ask that if anyone comes forward to answer a comment or question that is posed in the questions box, then if you can introduce yourselves just at the start of your response, so we get to know who's actually on the call. The proposal is to start with a short presentation, followed by discussion in relation to any comments or questions that you want to raise, either because maybe your point wasn't covered in the presentation or because you want to follow up on anything that's been raised in the presentation. There is a slight difference to a normal meeting. In a normal meeting, we would suggest that we wait until the presentation is finished and then invite questions. But what we would ask you to do is put any questions or comments into the comments box at the side of the window just from the start, and we'll pick these up, and as kind of chairman or moderator, I'll summarise what the questions are and put them to hopefully the relevant colleagues. I was wondering, Bobby, if it's possible for you just to say a few words about how members of the public or elected members can put comments into the box, if I can hand over to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're viewing this as a member of the public, you should see a box up in the corner, and it's got a question mark on it. And this is where you can ask any questions, and obviously everybody that's on the call will aim to try and answer as many as they can. So please feel free to use that function and ask as many questions as you like. Thank you.
Thanks for a lot, Bobby. Now, one advantage, if I can call it that, of meeting in this format is that the meeting is recorded, because there might be some people who are unable to attend. The meeting is recorded and it will be shared on YouTube, and each of the questions that are logged, we keep a log of the questions that are raised and the answers. So again, there's a record of the meeting and the questions and answers, so that serves as a record for people that can't make it. I should also add that we offer callers a chance for further one-to-ones after this. I'll ask my colleague Peter Dixon maybe just to say a few words of that before we get into the detail of the presentation, just what the format for that is. But as I said, the format really is Peter and several colleagues will kind of talk you through the circumstances of the flood, what we've done, what we're proposing to do about it, both as the council and with our other partners. Then we'll invite you to, well, as I said, you can express your questions at any point, but after the presentation's finished, I'll lead through the questions What you'll find is that I will probably repeat back the questions that people have made. That's just so that it's actually recorded onto the video, and I will invite colleagues and others to respond to the questions. So hopefully that's reasonably clear. If it's not clear, again, if you could ask it just to put questions or comments in, we'll try and deal with the process bits as well as the actual subject matter of the evening's proceedings. But other than that, Peter, if you're okay to take it away in relation to the presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Keith. Next slide, thank you. So just going to go on to run through the presentation. I'm just going to talk a bit about the storm itself and the initial operational response on the sort of day following it and what happened. Keith mentioned there, if anyone's interested in a sort of follow-up one-to-one or whatever, you can just pop a request for that into the chat box and we'll follow up with you later on. And at the end of the presentation is also the team's contact details, the direct email address that we've set up and the web page that we've got, and you can contact us through that as well. So just in terms of the storm itself, on the 11th and 12th of August, during that night, much of Scotland was affected by significant thunderstorms and heavy rainfall. The entire Perth Across Council area suffered extensive rainfall, thunder and lightning for 6 hours from around 11 p.m. on the 11th of August. Now, we now know from our investigations that the flooding has affected approximately 190 properties in some parts of Perth, as well as Alyth, Kinross, Dunning, Pitlochry and other communities. In Perth itself, the Met Office has confirmed that the majority of the rain came between midnight and 3 a.m, with 42 millimetres of rain falling between 1 and 2 a.m. The total rainfall in Perth was 86.4 millimetres for the 24-hour period from 6 a.m. on the 11th to 6 a.m. on the 12th of August. Met Office climate data indicates that Perth would normally experience an average of 65 millimetres of rain for the whole of the month of August. So 42 millimetres in an hour is therefore exceptional and confirms that the storm was significant. Initial rainfall analysis by SEPA has confirmed this, and flooding impacts were experienced across a widespread area of central and northeast Scotland, and SEPA are preparing a comprehensive report of the event, which will be published when complete. So we're just going to move on to the next item on the presentation, which is just to talk a little bit about the flood mechanism in the local area in Perth and the Craigie Burn catchment. I was just going to ask Andy Brown in the Council's Road Maintenance Partnership to take that on. Thanks, Nat.
Well, thanks, Peter. The actual mechanism for the Craigie Burn area, I'm Andy Brown. I'm a senior engineer with Perth Kinross Council Road Maintenance Partnership. When the flood alleviation scheme for Perth was designed in the late 1990s, it was recognised that the Craigie Burn was a contributor towards it for surface water runoff flooding. So we had the Broxden flood alleviation scheme built, as well as the reservoirs up there. We have the reservoirs down on the South Inch as well. The Craigie Burn mechanism essentially relies on attenuation of water up at the Broxden ponds so that we can hold the water back and release it into the Craigie Burn in a controlled manner through storage in these 3 reservoirs that we have up there. And through doing that, we can prevent any flooding lower down in the Craigie Burn watercourse as it passes through the urban area of Perth. There's about 7 culvert sections along the Craigie Burn to its outfall point in the River Tay, upstream of Perth Harbour. And we have various telemetry stations in place, both up at Broxden ponds and various significant culvert points as we go down the Craigie Burn watercourse. That allows us to read the height of the water, and also we've got some cameras there as well. That allows us to deploy our resources to keep various screens along the watercourse clear, and if required, close gates down at the South Inch reservoir area as well. But essentially we're looking at attenuation of the water up in the Broxden area, which effectively just drains quite a big catchment area, forestry and agricultural land to the south of Broxden before it picks up all the urban drainage. That's the way that the maintenance regime is carried out on the Craigie Burn by the Road Maintenance Partnership staff. The various screens that we have on the Craigie Burn, where some of them have got automated cleaning equipment on them, which is fairly easy to operate, and other ones it's just a case of getting guys out and cleaning them by hand. So effectively, we're responsible for the maintenance and operation of the part of the flood prevention scheme, the flood alleviation scheme that pertains to the Craigie Burn catchment area. Hopefully, is that? Do you want me to elaborate on anything more on that, Peter?
If you could, Andy, just we're going to just talk a little bit about when the flood actually happened, because I think we had the ponds overtopping, etc., up at Broxden, and quite a big kind of amount of water coming down the catchment, and just how the screens, etc., got on as well. If you could, please, thanks.
Yes, certainly. Well, the big problem for us was we got our first telemetry alarms in round about 11:30 at night on the 11th of August. Our man that was on standby for the Perth area, he was reacting to telemetry alarms that just said effectively there was a screen at Queen's Avenue, a trash screen, and one down at Perth Prison. Telemetry alarms were just telling them to clear those screens of any debris, which he did on a number of occasions, right through to round about 12:30, 1 o'clock. The level in the Craigie Burn at that time was it was staying pretty constant. It wasn't rising at any great rate to give any cause for concern. So after having cleaned these screens on a number of occasions, this guy had been working from 8 o'clock in the morning, so it was now 1 o'clock in the morning. He basically left an email message for the guys that were coming in the morning to carry on cleaning these screens, inspecting them and cleaning them if required from 7:30 in the morning, and he went to get some sleep. What happened, as Peter mentioned earlier on, we had a particularly significant amount of rain, 42 millimetres between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the early morning of the 12th. Looking at our telemetry station on the Craigie Burn, just at the railway arches at the South Inch, we effectively had 500 mil rise in the water level there over a period of about 2 hours between midnight and 2:30. That was due to us losing the attenuation that we have up at Broxden ponds. The two wet ponds, which they're basically called wet ponds because they have a sump in them, and they've always got some amount of water in them. The dry pond being on the upper woodland side, which generally is dry apart from a very small water course, benign water course during normal times that flows through it. We lost attenuation in the dry pond. It overtopped. All of the attenuation was full up. One of the main reasons for that was that the culvert up at Broxden roundabout was choked. It failed effectively. So Glasgow Road from Broxden down towards Upper Woodlands became the water course for that culvert. The dry pond then filled up very, very quickly, and we also had overtopping the Suds ponds with associated development up at Bellway Homes, which also bypassed the dry ponds and flowed directly into the Craigie Burn immediately downstream from the dry ponds to join the water that was already overtopping that particular reservoir. So effectively, we then had a situation where there was no attenuation to stop the flow of water, to throttle back the flow of water that was coming down the Craigie Burn. As I said, we have approximately 7 areas where the water course is culverted between Broxden and the South Inch, and at each of these culverts we had a situation where the capacity of the pipe was not sufficient for the volume of water that was thrown at it. And we had overtopping the attenuation areas, for example, at Persimmon Homes, Cherry Bank site, Low Road, and then at Queen's Avenue, Balmoral Place as well, although the culvert immediately downstream from Balmoral Place was able to take the water. Initially, there was some severe damage done up at Balmoral Place as well. And then working our way downstream, Queen's Avenue, the culvert under the road there choked completely, was full, more than full to capacity, and the water ran down Queen's Street. Some of it continued down Queen Street, down the Priory Place and the Croft Park. A lot of it went down Windsor Terrace and caused a lot of damage down in Windsor Terrace itself, and an inundation of the Glenelm Road school campus basically went in the front there, back out again and down onto the South Inch. That's the mechanism of what happened on in the early hours of the 12th. We didn't get any telemetry alarm telling us that it was a requirement to close the gates on the South Inch until around about 2 o'clock. That would coincide with that 42 millimetres of rainfall that we got, and the surge of water that came down from Broxden right the way through Craigie, overwhelmed a few of these culverts and then up and onto the road. As soon as we got the telemetry alarm to close the gates on the South Inch, we mobilised our standby forces to do that. Within the hour when they got there, the force of water was so great that it was impossible to close these gates up at the railway arches. Thereafter, it was a case of we called out extra road maintenance partnership lads. We had about another 4 people, I think, called out to assist. We spent the rest of the night and into the following morning just firefighting, just trying to prioritise what was the most urgent case where we could be of help. All the various numerous flooding reports that were coming in via the customer service centre. Anything else you want me to touch on, Peter?
I think that's a lot of information there already, Andy. Thank you. I think that covers the next item as well, which is the council's initial response to the flooding. I was going to just check if Mike Rumgay, he's the Perth Station Commander for Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, was on the call. I think he was having a few technical problems, but I don't know if Mike made it in.
I'm in here, Peter. Yes, I'm in.
Right, okay. Over to you, thanks.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Rumgay. I'm the Station Commander at Perth Fire Station, and I was the on-call officer on the evening of the 11th into the morning of the 12th of August. We received our first calls from the Craigie area about 2:30, came from Queen Street. Prior to that, the Perth appliances had been deployed down to Fife, because as you know, the storm sort of came up from the south and curved its way out into the North Sea. But the Perth appliances were sent down to assist in Fife about 10 o'clock, so that we called in backup from around the county into Perth to cover for the appliances being down there. So started to receive calls locally about 1 o'clock, so resources were deployed then. So at 2:30 I got a phone call and asked to go out to investigate in Queen Street. Once I actually got to Queen Street, was a bit of a challenge itself. Obviously, I was met with a scene that never thought I'd ever see locally at all. Severe flooding in Queen Street. So on the back of that, we then had to go and do reconnaissance up in Darnhill Drive and then Murray Crescent. Obviously, the burn, I'm familiar with the area, so I knew that the Craigie Burn had obviously burst its banks and it was flowing its way through Craigie. We then deployed our water rescue team to the area about 3:30 when they became available, and the crews then went about making contact with residents in Queen Street, just trying to reassure them. Due to the volume of water that we were getting at that point and the swiftness of it, pumping operations wouldn't have been any help at that time in that area, just with the constant deluge of water. To give you a bit of background, we received 700 calls locally for assistance that night. There was 2,000 calls came in nationally. So the control room, as you can imagine, was overwhelmed with the calls. There's only 8 people working the control room normally, so they stood up the instant control room, which is what we do if there's a mass event on like that flooding, and we started deploying crews around the city just to assist. Obviously the flooding itself came right through Craigie, so it was fairly widespread devastation from the Craigie Burn. Personally, I went up and made contact with residents in Murray Crescent just to make sure everything was okay, and control were having to prioritise calls based on sort of life risk. So I'm really hopeful we got around to everybody that had put a call in, or at least you had some sort of contact with the fire service over the course of the day. It's a really challenging night for us. Won't hide from that, and we're just hopeful that we did everything we could for the people that required it at the time. That's it from me.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Next item on the presentation was the Police Scotland response. Now, Stuart Watson was going to try and make it on the call, but couldn't make it tonight. So if anyone's got any questions or comments or anything he wants to pass on, either if you're looking for a response as well, just put your questions in the chat box. We'll be happy to relay those to Stuart Watson at Police Scotland, and he can get back to you if need be. So we'll just move on to the next slide, if we could, please. And moving on now, just to talk a little bit about work beyond the flood recovery work, trying to help everyone get back to some sort of normality, hopefully, and what's going on in the future. So I was just going to ask Carol Rayburn from the Scottish Flood Forum to take the next item. Thanks a lot.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carol Rayburn and I'm Director of the Scottish Flood Forum. I will have met some of you when we had Flow, our mobile recovery unit in Perth city centre. So how can the Scottish Flood Forum help you? There are 2 aspects to what we do. The first is the recovery work, and that's helping support you through your insurance claims or issues that you're having following the flooding with your insurers. It's about funding as well. If you do have insurance issues, and it's also about future resilience work as well, which consists of flood protection for your homes, and working with you to perhaps form a community group that you can help each other in these types of situation. I'm aware that we have been out to visit some of the residents on this call this evening to carry out what we call a property level protection assessment, and that's a visual inspection of your property that we carry out, and we then make recommendations to you on what would be some of the best products to help prevent flood water from entering your properties. If you've got any questions this evening, please put them in the chat box down the side, and I'll try and respond to them this evening, or alternatively I can pick up with you individually if you have any particular issues that you don't want to kind of share with a wider audience this evening. So we're here to help you, and please get in contact. The best way of doing that is through info@scottishfloodforum.org. That's the best way of contacting us, and we'll respond to each individual request for support. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Now, next item on the agenda was to be an update from SEPA. And I don't know, we had invited Karen Bloodworth, but she was having technical problems. I don't know if Karen's made it on the call. If not, I can read out SEPA's update for her. Don't think she's in.
No, unfortunately, we can't get her in at the moment. Seems like technical issues at her side.
No problem. I've got some notes from Karen just to read out. So, SEPA's update. The Scottish Flood Forecasting Service is provided in partnership by SEPA and the Met Office. The service provides a daily national flood guidance statement, which is issued to Category 1 and 2 agencies, including local authorities and emergency responders, and provides an assessment of flood risk for the next 5 days. Now, the Scottish Flood Forecasting Service also supports SEPA's Floodline service, which provides live flooding information and advice on how to prepare or cope with impacts of flooding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For those registered with Floodline, they can receive flood messages for an area of interest direct to their phone. For the recent flooding event on the 11th and 12th of August, SEPA issued a flood alert for Tayside on the 10th of August, highlighting the risk of heavy thundery showers, which may result in flooding impacts from surface water and small water courses. The flood alert was updated over the following days when further information was available. Now, due to the difficulty in forecasting summer intense thunderstorms in terms of location and timings, SEPA are unable to provide specific location information where the impacts may occur, and therefore the risk of flooding impacts from these storms is highlighted across a larger regional area. SEPA have made a commitment to explore and trial available approaches to surface water flood forecasting and hope to make developments in this over the coming years. SEPA have undertaken a post-flood analysis looking at rain gauges in the network where available, and the rainfall measured in Perth confirms that this was an extreme flood event and nearly a month's rainfall within 12 hours. SEPA are currently producing a national report on the flood event, and this will be made publicly available in the coming weeks. If you'd like more information on Floodline, please visit the website at www.floodlinescotland.org.uk, or you can contact SEPA via their website online. Okay, and sticking with me for the next item on the presentation, just to talk briefly about the flood risk management plans that we have in place. Now, under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act, SEPA published 14 national flood risk management strategies in December 2015. And that was followed up by local authorities publishing local flood risk management plans in June 2016. So Perth and Cross Council published the Tay local flood risk management plan at that point. And those plans are online, you can view them, and they're currently undergoing a review for the next cycle of plans, which commences for SEPA strategies. That'll be in December 2021, and for local authority local plans from June 2022, and the draft plans will be subject to a public consultation early next year, so you'll be able to see what's been proposed for that. In terms of the current plan that we're working under, we do have a flood study proposed for the Craigie Burn Catchment, and so that is already in the current local flood risk management plans, and the study is aimed at examining the flood risk in the Queen's Avenue, Queen Street and Windsor Terrace area, but we'll obviously take a catchment-wide approach now, particularly given the other problems that we've witnessed from the recent flooding. This study will be integrated with a wider project known as the Perth Integrated Catchment Study Project, and the hydraulic model for the Craigie Burn has already been developed, so we're underway. The next phase of the study, which will examine potential means of managing the flood risk in the area, will commence in the current financial year and is anticipated to progress for about 12 to 18 months. The study will be informed by the recent flooding. Will include a review of all existing flood defence assets in the catchment, and as with all flood studies, the Council will liaise with the community during its development. So that brings us to the final item on the presentation, which is ongoing communication arrangements. So the Council, obviously, given the widespread nature of the flooding that was experienced in August, we've received a high volume of correspondence since then. So apologies if we've not got back to everyone as quickly as they might like. We've had to prioritise our response to this. Obviously, quite a lot of staff are out on the ground still supervising works. We've been doing quite a lot of work in the Craigie Burn Catchment, which hopefully you've seen. So we will get back to you, but it may just take us time to do so. We have set up a generic email address. It's flood@pkc.gov.uk, and that'll be on the following slide, the final slide in the presentation. And we've also set up an August 2020 flooding web page, and again the link to that will be on the final page coming up shortly. We're hoping to get more community bulletins out to the local community, and hopefully, as Keith McNamara has already said, be an opportunity for further meetings after this event upon request, if you just pop that into the chat box. And if we can just have the final slide, I'll hand back to Keith. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, and thanks everybody for your contributions there. I think the scale of the sort of emergency situation was brought home, certainly from what Andy was said, in relation to, I think, the telemetry station at the South Inch, which rose, I think you said 500 mil, Andy, and probably in my old language that's like a foot and 2/3 within a 2-hour period, which just goes to show the level of water rise in such a short space of time. So thanks once again to everybody. I'm now going to turn to the questions, and again invite anyone to put in any questions or comments into the chat. And I'm also very grateful to colleagues who are already beginning to populate some of the questions and comments with answers. What I would suggest we do is just go through them from the top, try and deal with them as on a one-to-one basis. If you need further clarification or comment, then please feel free to do so. So first question is from John Summers. Hi John. The question is the infrastructure in place for all the new housing developments near Low Road? Craig McQueen from our flooding team has given an answer to that, to say all new housing developments must include something called sustainable drainage systems, sustainable urban drainage systems into their design, and these systems are in place. So basically the construction of these buildings should not increase the risk to properties downstream. So again, I'm taking that as a complete answer. I'm not necessarily going to invite Craig to say any more, but John, if you want any follow up to that, if you can put it in the chat. The next question from Janice was why were the floodgates not closed? SEPA had issued warnings. And the response from Stuart is the flood alleviation scheme is to protect Perth from river flooding, and we activate the scheme on a river flood warning. There was no river flood warning in place, so that we didn't put any additional measures in advance. Stuart, is there anything else you want to add, or do you think your answers covered that sufficiently?
What I would say is that we're reviewing our procedure for implementing the Perth floodgates, and one of the considerations that we'll take on board is the level of warnings we get from other sources. Yeah,
that's great, Stuart. Thanks. That's really helpful and hopefully gives some assurance. Next question came from John again. Is there a flood prevention plan for this local area? Maybe one for yourself, Peter. I know you were saying that we're about to. Or we are engaged in a flood study in the Craigie Burn catchment. I don't know if we've necessarily got a flood prevention plan for that area, but you can maybe clarify.
Yeah, Keith, we do. As I mentioned, we've got on the council's website, you'll find the TAE Flood Risk Management Strategy, which is published by SEPA, and another document called the TAE Local Flood Risk Management Plan. Sorry. Now that covers most of the TAE side. But within that, you'll find Perth is listed under, it's known as potentially vulnerable area. 12 and 13 are the two numbers you're looking for, and I think it's number 13 includes this area of Perth, and you'll see the various actions we've got in there. We've got the flood study. We've got the various sort of standard actions that we carry out, which include watercourse maintenance, things like flood warning, self-help measures for residents, planning policies, all the kind of different things, all the different activity we've got around flood risk management, and that's in there. The published local flood risk management plan was reviewed last year as required by the Flood Act, and you can also find the interim report that we published last year. It's on the website as well. And that's all in there. In terms of producing the next plan, because each of these plans covers a 6-year period, so the plan for the next 6-year period is currently getting developed, and as I say, that'll be subject to public consultation early next year. And what I'll do is I'll pop in the chat box the link to the website where you can view those plans.
That's really helpful, Peter, thank you. So it's possibly not a specific flood plan for the Craigie Burn, but it's more about the Perth catchment. Is that roughly right, Peter?
Yeah, that is. I mean, the council also has a flood emergency plan in place, which is slightly different. It's more focused on the response to specific flood events, etc., and how that's dealt with. So we'll have that in place as well, and you'll find that referred to in the published TAE local flood risk management plan too.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from John, and I think it maybe predated the presentation. So question was, why is there no early warning systems in place based on water rising and the debris prevention system going under the road at Queen's Avenue? But as Stuart's responded in the text box, that there are systems in place, and Andy Brown gave us some more details on that one. So John, if you need any more on that, just please put something in the chat. The next point was raised around property owners in Queen Street whose gardens back onto the burn and Windsor Terrace. Are they responsible for the sections of the wall to be rebuilt? And we've had a response from Craig in and around that. So basically, yes, homeowners are responsible for their own property. They may wish to contact their insurance companies regarding this if they have appropriate cover. We've carried out some emergency works to clear the burn and recovered fallen masonry and returned it to relevant residents, so they may be able to use the stone in any recovery or repair. And Craig's also said the council may be able to give assistance to residents going forward by providing advice on proposed repairs. So again, that's possibly one for a one-to-one follow-up if there's any inquiries from residents, perhaps through Craig, that we can give further guidance on that. But we regret to advise that damage to people's own property is actually their own responsibility.
It's maybe worth adding, Keith, that there's a number of different properties affected, and I think there's a bit of a request that how do all these different property owners kind of pull themselves together to get a kind of coordinated reinstatement of the wall. So we're quite happy to kind of coordinate that. Again, if people just get in touch with the chat box, we can do that.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Peter. The next question relates from Dave when it relates to broken fence at Balmoral Place to be removed and replaced. Craig's saying that the removal will take place next week, and we're liaising with our colleagues in the council's green space team in terms of a replacement, so we can sort of fill that gap in our information when we get that information from our green space colleagues. Next question relates to debris in the burn at Balmoral Place being removed. And again, thanks, Craig. You said that work's due to start next week, and that will be in place for a couple of weeks to get these items removed. So again, hopefully that's answered the question. But once again, if you have any more follow-ups, then please put it in the chat. There's a question in relation to from Mike in relation to the holding ponds. How effective are they once they're full? And Andy's responded to say we have telemetry stations. Sorry, I'm struggling with that word tonight. At the 3 Broxton flood ponds, which allows to monitor water levels, and it's a balancing act to let the water out in top ponds into the lower ponds for attenuation, and then a series of sluice gates we have at Broxton allows us to control the flow of water being released into the Craigie Burn. Maybe just to reiterate, Andy, that this was such an exceptional instance that the attenuation that we had there just couldn't cope with that huge deluge of water in such a short space of time. Andy, is there anything you want to add to
that? No, that's effectively what caused the problems downstream, Keith. When we lose the attenuation at Broxton, we lose control of the rate that water is released into the Craigie Burn. And in this case, when everything's full and overtopping, the water, as fast as it will come down into the Broxton catchment area, it will flow at that rate down through the urban section of the Craigie Burn. So yes, there was, once we had lost the attenuation at Broxton, there was no effective control on the water that made its way, deluge of water that made its way down through the Craigie Burn.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andy.
Can I maybe just add, Keith, that any flood defence structure that we build obviously has a limited capacity. It will not be able to hold back an infinite amount of water. So when the ponds they do fill up, as we saw in this event, as Andy says, the attenuation element's gone. So any flood defence structure you build will only have a sort of set capacity. But that is something we're going to look at again in terms of the Craigie Burn flood study, just to see what can be done, if anything, to try and improve the capacity up there. Okay,
thanks a lot, Peter. I think that's again reassuring that we're looking at that. Next question came from John. It was in relation to why did no one from PKC assist with the clean-up of Queen Street and the bottom of Wilson Street. Stuart Dahl from our Roads Maintenance Partnership said we'll need to check with the local supervisor what assistance was provided. We know we lifted many tons of stones and other debris, but couldn't specifically state what happened in Queen Street, Wilson Street. So, John, apologies if we didn't get to that. We know that yourself and your neighbours kind of went out and did it yourself, and we're really grateful to you for that. I have a suspicion that part of that is, as we said at the start of this session, there were multiple sites, and I think we're probably just responding to those emergency issues in the early stages. So perhaps if we didn't get to you, we do apologise. But if we have further information, Stuart, we can put that in and add to the chat. Next question relates to what is the view if the catchment ponds are sufficient and they don't appear to be, how can they be expanded? And then I think there's a comment follow up from that from Councillor Wilson saying flood ponds now and in future plus motorway flood water. But I think, as you said there, Peter, that's something we'll have a look at.
Yeah, I mean, the initial indications are the sort of numbers we got from the rain gauges, etc., were that the capacity of the ponds was exceeded during the flood event, so there wasn't much we could do, unfortunately. But in terms of the future, that's certainly something we can look at as part of the flood study to see if we can try and improve on things. Okay, thanks a lot for that. And again, if there's any follow-ups, please add them into the chat. Next question was how do I go about claiming for uninsured losses? It's also a comment. It's clear that someone else should have been brought in to ensure the Craigie Burn flowed freely. I'll maybe deal with these slightly separately because I think they are separate things. So claiming for uninsured losses, not too sure about that one. Carol, is there anything you could add to that to maybe give us a bit more light on the subject?
A lot at the moment. What we're seeing is depends on the wording of the policy, what is included and what is not. But if the resident would like to contact me, I'll take that offline. Thanks very much.
And sorry, the follow-up comment was about someone else should have been brought in to ensure Craigie Burn flowed freely. That's maybe one. I don't know if Stuart or Andy want to comment on that one.
Sorry, I was scrolling up trying to find it, Keith. I don't know what if the resident wants to clarify what they mean about who else we could have brought in. Did they mean during immediately in the event or after the event? I'm not sure. I haven't been able to find it in the chat yet.
Okay, well, we'll maybe defer that one, and if we could get a bit more information, we're happy to come back to that question.
Yeah. I could probably just add a similar comment to previously, Keith. Any watercourse has, a set sort of channel area, and as Andy's described, there's various culverts that it flows through, which have, the whole system's got a limited capacity. And during this flood event, there was no sort of doubt really that the capacity of the channel to convey the flow was just greatly exceeded, unfortunately. So that's why we've got the flooding happening, and it's very difficult even for the guys if we'd had more staff on clearing screens and clearing blockages which occurred during the event. It still wouldn't have been up to carrying that amount of water from the storm. It just wasn't possible, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks a lot, Peter. Next question from Mike, inquiring why are the culverts between Balmoral Place diminishing in size as you go downstream? I'm not entirely sure who's placed for that. Would that be Peter or Stuart or Andy?
Possibly historical, Keith. Just the way Perth has been developed over the years. Certainly not by design, I'd suggest. But yeah, we could probably have a look at that. But again, it's just that's just the situation we're faced with, really. And if we were, if you were going to design the town from day one, you would probably not have it as it is. But again, same comment that any culvert, any watercourse has a limited capacity to convey a flow, particularly during a storm event like this.
So presumably, Peter, these culverts have been put in decades or possibly even further ago than that, and it's not really something which is a modern design thing.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm just making a general comment without specifically knowing the sizes, etc., and looking at a map. Yeah, generally, development just happens over the historical period, and these things have just been put in at whatever sizes they're in at, unfortunately. But yeah, we can have a look at that again.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Again, that's really helpful. Next question comes from Janice. If screens had been needing clean several times in an hour or two, why was it left, and why wouldn't we continue to need cleaned? But Stuart's responded to say the volumes of water dropped and watercourse levels stabilised after cleansing the screens, and the on-call officer returned home thinking it was stable. And then when the situation developed further, he was out again and called for assistance. So he did come back out when the situation was highlighted to us that there was a problem. Anything else to add, Stuart, or does that kind of cover it?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Obviously, there was initial rainfall that led to the screens becoming covered in trash. The supervisor went out and cleansed them. The situation improved, and there was no reason to suspect that it was going to deteriorate at the speed that it, or at all, but it's definitely at the speed that it did then suffer the rainfall over the city.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Comment from Councillor Wilson about work on flood ponds planned for October. I think we've perhaps covered that from earlier commentary, unless anybody has anything else to add. Okay. Next question relates to why were the gates not closed and the culverts checked? There was at least 3 days notice from the Met Office. Stuart, you've probably got a comment in relation to the Met Office warnings or the nature of the Met Office warnings.
Yeah, we're getting numerous yellow warnings from the Met Office. None of most of them are well, yellow warnings are be aware. There's nothing specific in a yellow warning. Over the course of the last financial year and to date, this financial year, we've had 72 such yellow warnings, and as a result, we don't put in place any special arrangements for a yellow warning that's fairly general and not specifically giving us an indication of a problem that's going to arise. Out of these 72 occasions, there's been 3 occasions, including this one, where it's actually materialised into something. So to put in place measures every time we got a yellow warning would be logistically challenging.
Yeah, and I think part of that was the comment from yourself, Peter, in relation to SEPA doing the study of these very high level, high volume summer storms, to see if we can get a bit cleverer in terms of the warnings around that, because they are kind of very sort of geographically specific. So it's a real challenge, and as you say, to have staff going out 72 times would be incredibly challenging in terms of our capacity to support that. The next question comes from John, saying the previous flooding a few years back, the council came out with sandbags, but not this time, wondering why. And your response, Stuart, is the event was so quick with no time to respond. Our standby officer had been at the trash screens at 1:15 and there was no issues. And then by 2:15, but effectively an hour later, the entire area was flooded. So again, presumably, Stuart, it was just the speed of the build-up of the water.
Yeah, that's all it was. Had it been a slower rainfall event that just built up over a period of time, we would have had a fighting chance of assisting more folk than we were. And apologies for my typing there. Words are all running into each other.
It's okay, but I think we got the gist, Stuart. So thanks for that. Next question from Ron. Hi, Ron. You're asking about the amount and speed of flow in Queen Street pose a risk to life, and Stuart's saying, well, it did mean our standby officer who drives a Ford Focus couldn't get near the location. I'm guessing risk to life, there's a difference between risk to life of people living in their houses and risk to life of somebody who's maybe out and about. Stuart, what's your comments on that one?
Yeah, I don't know if the fire service were there, they might be better placed to comment on it. But from the videos that I saw posted, had you been out on the road in that flow and that volume of water, then in my opinion there would have been a risk to life to you. If you were securely barricaded in your house, which I appreciate, water gets in through air bricks and under doors and things, but I think if you were in your house and sheltering from it, I think the risk would have been far less. But perhaps the fire service could Could elaborate on that a little bit?
Thanks, Stuart. Mike, do you want to add any comments to that?
Yeah, certainly. Just to echo what Stuart said there, I would agree that if you were out in the street in that environment, you would be in danger of being swept away. The volume and speed of water was ferocious, to be fair. If you were in your house, you were in the safest place to be at that time. So yeah, that's why we only deployed our water rescue team to the area, purely because if we deployed a regular fire engine, like fire crew there, they wouldn't be able to do very much due to the volume of water. So that's why the swift water rescue team were deployed. So yeah, being in the house was definitely the safest place to be, as opposed to be out in the street. Okay,
thanks a lot, Mike. Next question comes from John, and I think it's really helpful that you've asked the question about, are there any grants to assist with floodgates, snorkel, air vents, sandbags, etc., suggesting that having them in place may save more of the houses than cost a lot less than the systems. Carol's helpfully responded, there's no grants that we're necessarily aware of, or the Scottish Flood Forum is currently aware of, but what Carol is saying is, in communities we've seen residents working together in the council to produce pods where supplies of sandbags and other materials have been provided, and I think that's a key message from tonight. As council, as other partners and indeed the Scottish Flood Forum would be delighted to work with residents around these types of things, where we can assist residents, and also just in terms of a bit more self-help working together. Carol, I know you've given a comprehensive answer there. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
All I would say is that I am aware that the Scottish Government are looking at property flood protection measures and the uptake of those at the moment, and it's something that the Scottish Flood Forum are contributing to as well. What we have seen, that even in areas that have been severely flooded in the past, that not everyone has then taken steps to go out and install flood protection measures. In places like Aberdeenshire, in previous flood areas across Scotland and in the borders as well. And I know that that's been an issue for some councils who have in the past provided flood grants for those reinstatement measures, but residents don't always take them up. So it's one of the things that we're working with the Scottish Government on, is trying to find out from residents who have been affected why, once they've experienced flooding, what are the barriers to the uptake of those measures. Now, it could be cost, it could be lack of accessibility, and flood protection is quite a new industry, and there's difficulties, I suppose, in knowing where to go, and that's certainly one of the things that we can support you with, is by those recommendations from the property level protection assessment, is what would actually work in your property. But equally, nothing is infallible, and we have experienced some really severe weather conditions. That's no consolation to those that have been impacted by flooding, but it's trying to minimise the water that is going to enter your property. It's not a plaster, unfortunately. It's a combination of products and working together with communities and all the other stakeholders that are here this evening to come up with solutions that are going to work for everyone moving forward.
Thanks, Carol. I think the takeaway is, let's kind of carry on these conversations about what we can do together to, alleviate the impacts of flooding, to prevent the terrible consequences of that. Next question relates to a question saying, aren't Persimmon and Bellway responsible for the maintenance of the watercourses, ponds and culverts? Did they actually do the job properly? How often are these checked by the council? And how has this flooding affected the planned developments up in Broxden? Andy's responded to say Persimmon Homes are responsible for maintaining the trash screen and culvert at Cherry Bank. The council doesn't maintain the area at present, but will do once it's been adopted, following the work requested to be carried out by Persimmon Homes. So what I think you're saying is Persimmon are responsible at present. Would you mind, I think there's a wee question about do they do the job properly and how often are they checked by yourselves? Is that something you can answer, Andy, or maybe perhaps Peter might answer that one?
Well, the Road Maintenance Partnership don't go into that site. It's been a private site, Keith. We are anxious to get the adoption process completed. If Persimmon Homes could carry out the work that's required to get what they've built up to the required design standards for the Road Maintenance Partnership to take over and maintain, we'd rather have it under our control than just relying on the private developer maintaining the culvert and the attenuation area that's there just now. We've no feedback from them on a regular basis saying what they're doing, other than from time to time assuring us that they have got a grounds maintenance company that carry out the work that's required.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andy. There was a bit of a question around both Persimmon and Bellway. Is there anything you can say on Bellway?
Well, Bellway Homes is just suds ponds taking the surface water runoff from the site, and again just throttling it back and releasing it in a slower manner into the water course that feeds into the Craigie Burn.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andy. Sorry, I was just scrolling down here. I've lost my place slightly, so bear with me. Yeah, next question was from Ron. Did the amount and speed of flow in Queen Street, sorry, with the risk of life, sorry, the next question was from Ron in relation to closing the floodgates under the railway arches. Would that made matters worse? And you've confirmed, Andy, that doesn't constrain any of the flow from water from the Craigie Burn, so it wouldn't have made any difference upstream. There is a comment from Ron saying risk for residents who may have tried to venture out and for fire and rescue staff attending. I think you've maybe answered that one, Mike, that there was a risk if you were out and about. Next question, when will the tunnels in the burn be cleared? Is that one for yourself, Andy?
That's probably one for Peter and the flood team, I would think.
All right. Okay, Peter.
Yeah, we're continuing with clearance works in the Craigie Burn. Been at it for a few weeks now, and I think there's a bit more to be done. So there's been some work done down along the path to Glenelg Road, at just adjacent to the South Inch. Windsor Terrace area has been done as well, and we'll be moving up to Balmoral Place, I think, from 5th of October. Maybe need to ask Craig McQueen if he's aware of any of the culverts getting cleared shortly. We've got further plans to, we'll certainly look to them. There may be further works to be done there. Is Craig on?
Yeah, I'm here, Peter. Sorry, Craig McQueen, engineer in the flooding team. I don't know what tunnels have been referred to there specifically, but we've certainly been looking at all the culvert crossings as we're doing the works. So as Peter just noted, we've completed what's at Windsor Terrace, although we do need to come back with a jetting unit and a vector unit to clear up one of the pipes that's still got a little bit of silt in it at the top end. And as we move basically up the catchment and continue to do works, we'll review all these structures as we go and clean them as required. It's really just to get rid of post-flood debris. Really, there's a lot of materials being mobilised and washed into these kind of higher, harder to reach places, I guess, as part of the high flow. So that's what we're trying to deal with at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, Craig. Next question from Dave. Did the amount and speed of flow from Queen Street pose a risk to life? So it's Dave suggesting, I do apologise if I got this wrong. The answer from the moderator is not really appropriate for people who were in the situation. I think Yeah, I think Mike's maybe answered that there would have been concerns with people being out and about, again, whether it's council staff, whether it be fire staff, or whether it be members of the public at that point in time. So hopefully Mike from the fire services has answered that, Dave, but if not, then please feel free to get back to us. The next question relates to the wall at Queen Street was not built by the owners of the property, so why are we now responsible for that? I don't know the circumstances, and might pass on to Peter, but possibly if the wall is on somebody's land and they are now the landowner, perhaps unfortunately that they are responsible for any items which are on their land. Peter, do you have any more information on that one?
Exactly that, Keith. Yeah, if you are the landowner, or probably what we refer to as the riverbank owner or the riparian landowner under common law, you are responsible for that bit of ground. So if your wall was on your ground and the wall collapsed during the flood, even though you might not have built it, but it's on property that you own, unfortunately that wall is yours, yeah. Okay,
thanks, Peter. Unfortunately, it seems to be the case. So. Yeah, sorry about that. Comment around there appears to be no regular dredging or clean-up along the course of the burn on an ongoing basis. As this is the third major flood since 2000, surely this has to be a higher priority. I know, Peter, you did say that we're doing a flood study of the Craigie Burn area, but you might have some comments in relation to dredging.
Yep, we don't dredge the burn, but we do give it a good clean out. We do routine inspections of the Craigie Burn every 6 months, and if anyone reports anything in between those routine inspections, we'll obviously look at that as well. Just let me dig out some notes here. And just colleague Craig McQueen dug out a few notes before the meeting, just looking back over the last 5 years. So we did sediment clearance at the South Inch and Balmoral Place back in 2015. 2016 we did tree and debris clearance at Windsor Terrace. We did sediment clearance works in the South Inch in 2017. Up at Darn Hall, I think we've got the erosion repair schedule for summer 2020, which was delayed by COVID, but that'll be completed as part of the wider works that are ongoing. And we've also still got to do works, including cleaning out the dry pond up near Broxden, adjacent to Glasgow Road. At Darn Hall, Balmoral work still to be done as well. And a lot of this was just, as Craig's already said, clearing out a lot of the debris that's been washed down. But we have carried out, maintenance work and clearance work in the past to try and keep the flow capacity of the burn as good as it can be.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. Next question relates to are the council going to pay for the Queen Street residents to install flood defences, and follows up by saying that flood preventions are not up to the job. This would be a fraction of the cost of what had been spent on a hydraulic arm and camera system at the Queen's Avenue culvert, which has failed on more than one occasion. So maybe Peter, deal with these one by one. Is the council going to be paying for Queen Street residents to install flood defences? And then if you wouldn't mind following that up by commenting on the cost of a hydraulic arm and camera system at Queen's Avenue.
In terms of installing flood defences, if we're referring to the kind of property flood protection measures that sort of Carol was talking about earlier on, they are for the property owner to pay for and install. We can obviously advise on that, as can the Scottish Flood Forum. And if you have a look in the frequently asked questions that were circulated after the flood, you'll find some links and sources of advice on that in there. If we're talking about, some sort of flood scheme, building flood walls, storage ponds, and that kind of thing, that may or may not come out of the Craigie Burn flood study, and the council could potentially look to take a flood scheme forward, a further flood scheme for the area. Just depending on the outcome of that study. So the council's got sources of capital grant assistance that we could access from the Scottish Government for that. Council has to fund a bit of those works as well. And there are time implications with that, because we really have to put measures in a flood risk management plan now for them then to be prioritised by SEPA as it happens, and then for them to attract grant funding, because the Scottish Government only has so much grant money that it allocates every year, and the pot of money that they have has been allocated for the next round of flood risk management plans already. So it depends what we're talking about. If it's local property flood defences, that rests with the property owner. If you're in a council house, speak to the council's housing service, because they are the property owner. So in some instances it may be down to housing to look at that for you. But if you're in a private property, that is really down to yourself. But if it's a wider flood scheme for the area, that would be probably down to the public authorities to look at that. Okay, cheers, Peter.
Next question talks about, my neighbours have most of their wall and other neighbours in the garden. When will the work begin to repair? I'm not too clear of where that is. I'm going to guess that might be the Queen Street wall we were talking about earlier on. And I think if it is, then I think the previous answers to these questions related to it's really the the property owner's role to be repairing that wall because it's on their land. Next question from Mike, will there be a pause in building on the western edge as the increased frequency of flooding and the failure of suds to be effective makes further building dangerous? I think Craig's kind of answered that from a previous question about new construction projects through the planning process, building process, have to have sustainable urban drainage systems in place. I think if our SEPA colleagues were on the call, or Scottish Water colleagues were on the call tonight, they would say that what we're experiencing is greater levels of quite significant storms, and that's more a kind of changing climate than anything. And I think they have the evidence to demonstrate that. So I'm not entirely sure that the sort of association of building at the western edge with the controls in place and the flooding. Unless Peter or colleagues have any further comments on that one, I think that's the sort of current, not only I guess the council position on that one, but probably the sort of national position on that. In other words, if you can demonstrate you have a proper sustainable urban drainage system in place, then you would be granted planning approval to proceed. So Peter, is that one for yourself?
No, yeah, that's correct, Keith. SUDs are implemented now a legal requirement to have SUDs, so that any surface water generated on a site is dealt with at source and stored and only released at a low rate back into receiving drainage network or a watercourse. Obviously, as I said, any flood defence structure that you build will have a limited capacity. So our team and other teams in the council do get quite involved in the drainage impact assessment side of things that happens through the planning process. We're commenting on something like 400 planning applications every year that's coming through that process. Got quite a high standard on SUDs, but unfortunately it just seems in these extreme flood events that you can have situations where that standard is getting exceeded. But I think it's better that we have the SUDs in place than not. There will definitely be a benefit from them. But I think, as you say, provided developers follow the process there and provide SUDs to satisfactory standard, then that development will continue.
Yeah, thank you. Next question, is there an outline plan and proposed timetable to show what work is planned over the next period with regular updates and communications on the work? I know you've probably answered that, Peter, in terms of information on the council web pages, which are obviously on your screen at the moment, and also, as you said, the sort of impending flood study and works around that one, and flood bulletins that will be going out. So presumably the communications with local residents will be covered through that process.
Yeah, that should cover it, Keith. In the meantime, if people are looking for information, they can email the flood@pkc.gov.uk email address, and we'll get back to them.
Okay, thank you. Question from another inquirer about, for many years the council worked the burn and cleaned the burn. Why is this stopped? And Andy's responded by saying we've telemetry in place at various points to monitor water levels and the cameras, plus automated screen clearing And Craig's just added there very helpfully, we do a walkover of the burn every 6 months, so we do walkovers, and we have the telemetrics as well. So I think we've possibly given a response to that question. Question from Janice saying, will the burn be dredged more often to allow more volume of water, and also has the pipe which feeds the pond on the south inch been cleaned out, as if not the pond's water level will reduce? I think you've kind of responded already about dredging, Peter, and also about the flood study, so I think we've maybe kind of responded to that. Do we have a position on the pipe which feeds the pond on the south inch? Do we know anything about that at all?
Yeah, I'm certainly aware of that. I don't know if it needs cleaned out. I don't think, I mean, the pond on the south inch doesn't really act as any sort of flood defence structure. It's not a formal storage area, although the wider south inch itself is definitely a flood storage reservoir. I would have to check. There is a manhole and a cover actually in the Craigie Burn itself, and we can certainly get that checked. But as I say, it doesn't really perform any flood defence function.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Next question was, did the building work uphill from the Cherry Bank negatively impact on the drainage capacities downhill? I think that we've probably already given the response in terms of planning approval and sustainable urban drainage. So the answer is, I think we've got to say that it shouldn't be, because of the balances in place through the SUDS drainage systems in place. Next question, a comment on Queen Street, an insurance company has tentatively advised cost of approximately £30,000. I presume that's for the wall. Who can afford that to rebuild a wall at the bottom of a garden? I think that's possibly a specific thing, and I'm just wondering if whoever's posted that might want to speak to Carol about any help that can be offered in relation to maybe dealing with insurance companies, if that's okay, Carol.
Yeah, that's fine. If they'd like to contact us, we'll take that offline.
Thanks very much. Next question from Jane. Are there any plans to do something to stop the Craigie Burn behind Murray Crescent from breaching? Peter, would that be kind of covered in the flood study?
Yeah, we'll certainly look at that. We'll be looking at the full length of the Craigie Burn from Broxton all the way down to its confluence with the River Tay, Keith.
Okay, thank you. Next question was suggesting that, next comment is suggesting that many people have suggested that the drainage capacity wasn't taken into account when the new housing estates were built, and it would seem as this has a negative impact on everyone downstream. Videos of the flow of water bursting out at Cherry Bank would suggest this was true. And again, I think we just need to refer to the previous answer to the questions you said, Peter. We as the council get multiple planning applications to look at. There's a team of professionals look at the flooding implications of or the surface water implications of each of these applications. And if your team felt that appropriate measures weren't being included in, you would be objecting at the planning stage, presumably.
Yep, that's right, Keith. Same for SEPA as well, plus any other statutory consultees to the planning process. But I think in this instance, we kind of know where the water came from. Just a very intense storm over a short period, just overwhelmed the capacity of the watercourse and drainage systems, etc. in the area, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks, Peter. A couple of comments which maybe might run together. There's a comment around, is the tunnel under Queen Street Avenue too small to give new developments further upstream? Less holding of water and faster runoff, will this tunnel be enlarged? And the second point from Janice saying, do we need more ponds? Again, Peter, is that something we can sort of take away and factor into the flood study, just to make sure we're capturing the comments that residents are making?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose we're talking about the culvert at Queen Street. That'll be more to do with the Craigie Burn itself, and given the kind of comments we've made about SUDS and holding and attenuating water on a development site, there isn't a direct link between those development sites and the water that gets into the Craigie Burn, because it is attenuated in SUDS before being released. Okay,
thanks, Peter. The next couple of comments talk about this wall. Says, if a private wall forms part of the fence, should there not be a sharing of costs? and it says some insurance companies may pay and some don't. The person's saying unfortunately they can't afford to build a wall. What will the council do? Again, back to yourself, Peter, but there isn't really a sort of formal flood defence. The wall is just part of the property, so it's not necessarily part of a council flood defence, sorry to say.
Yeah, exactly. That case, not part of a formal flood scheme, as it were. It is just a riverside wall, really, a private wall at the bottom of someone's garden. It's maybe important to say if we don't get the walls reinstated, the concern is for the residents' property that you could have the ongoing flow in the Craigie Burn causing erosion and loss of garden ground and those kinds of things. And if you've got drains and pipes in your garden, you know, they could start to be undermined, plus any structures, any fencing, walls, sheds, that kind of thing in your own garden. So that's the concern, that if it isn't attended to, we get bigger problems down the line, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Peter. The next question was about dredging, but I think we've covered that, so with your permission, I'm going to move on. The next comments is quite lengthy comments. I've not really had the opportunity to summarise it, but basically saying, well, we are seeing the exceptional rainfall and passing the buck to global warming, but the culverts in this area are 4 metres deep. It says on them, if you get down and look, 4 metres deep is huge. They were clogged completely with plant matter. Suggesting that the kind of water disappeared within minutes, and seeing the council is liable for increased insurance premium costs that the neighbours face. Can you assure us that you will now properly maintain relevant areas so there's no recurrence of the flooding, and will make public 2019 and 2020 maintenance records for drainage, and stop trying to palm this off onto extraordinary weather? I think the issue about the 4 metre culverts will probably be picked up in your flood study, Peter. I think the comments that there's a lack of maintenance, or maybe invite Stuart and Andy to come back to that. And there's a question about making public maintenance records, and again, maybe ask Stuart and Andy if we can kind of comment on that.
Yeah, happy to comment on that one, Keith. We have a planned maintenance regime for cleaning of all these screens, trash screens on the Craigie Burn. It's every fortnight. It's a 2-week planned maintenance regime. And in addition to that, we will reactively respond to cleaning them whenever there's significant rainfall. We have telemetry and cameras in place that allows us to see when the water's building up, get advance warning of that. This one about the 4 metre culvert must be Low Road, I think they're referring to. So I can only assume that the amount of plant-based debris, etc., is a result of the Persimmon Homes attenuation area immediately upstream from there, overflowing across the road Necessity Brain, washing out the embankment of the Cherrybank Inn, and bringing down a lot of debris, plant-based debris, in a relatively short space of time due to this surge of water we had from the loss of attenuation of the Broxden.
Sorry, Andy, just so I've got this clear, so what you're saying, it was debris that was washed because of the flooding, not debris that was accumulated over years because of a suggested lack of neglect from the council?
It wouldn't be a neglect from the council. We have a planned maintenance regime for cleaning. Tayside contract squads go out and cleaning these screens. It's every fortnight, and that's recorded. We get returns from these squads that go out and clean these screens. If there's any issues with it that's relevant, they'll also put the comments on the sheet as well. And in addition to that, we've got the historical data from the telemetry giving us the height of the water, etc., at any given time, any given day, and if there were any issues causing water to back up due to screens not being properly maintained, we would certainly pick it up on the telemetry.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Keith, Stuart here. I think it's also worth saying as well, our supervisor was out at 1:15 in the morning in Queen's Avenue and everything stabilised, but the volume, the rainfall volume and the amount of debris washed down the watercourse then blocked the trash screen at Queen's Avenue again. So there was a huge amount of debris within the watercourse in that space of an hour that will have blocked these trash screens, whether they'd been clear 2 hours beforehand or not.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stuart. And that kind of leads into the next question. Questioning, is it negligent of the council for not cleaning the burn on a regular basis? Well, I think you've answered that, Andy, by the records and the inspection and cleaning regimes that the council has in place and can demonstrate. Next question comes from Janice, talking about insurance and who to make a formal complaint to, and Carol's helpfully put a website into that, so hopefully that's answered that question there. Next question talks about Low Road was affected by an oil spillage and many properties in public areas were left covered in engine oil. Also, the old nursery owned by Muir Homes was contaminated with both oil and debris. Who and when will this be cleared, and when will Low Road and its drains be done, still blocked with gravel and oil residue? So maybe yourself, Andy, in terms of the situation with the oil spillage, I don't know if we're in a position to advise when that'll be cleared up, and also the suggestion that the drains are still blocked with gravel and oil residue.
In regards to the gully cleaning, Keith, we certainly have had the gully motor up there within days of the flood event. The issue that we have is we can't get access to all the gullies due to parked cars. The guys that go out there with the gully motor, they do make attempts to locate the owners of the cars, but if we can't get the cars moved, then we certainly can't get the gullies cleaned. But where we've had access to get to the gullies, we certainly have been out there and cleaned the gullies out. In regards to contaminated material from the oil or fuel from the garage, well, that's not something that Tayside Contracts could uplift. It would have to be a specialist contractor that would have to come in and uplift that. And I must admit, I was unaware that there was still an issue with that contaminated material.
Okay, it's maybe a wee takeaway, Andy, just to check that out, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Just to say, Keith, I had a little note from, just try and dig it out here, from our community green space colleagues, and they had removed grass and soil from the area that had been contaminated with oil residue and had the ground reinstated. So they did some of the outside work on the green space areas in there, so there's been some work done on that. I know SEPA had investigated, so there was some updates from them as well. But if there's still problems down there, I'm not sure who's dealing with that, but we can certainly try and find out and get a response to the residents.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. I think it'd be handy to just see where we are, because I think, like yourself, I thought a lot of that work had been done, but if it's not, then yeah, we're happy to look into that. Next couple of comments. Anonymous is saying, if it's agreed that the culverts are not adequate, will they be upgraded? And then a comment from Janice about Stanley Mills, the residents can close the floodgates if the situation worsens. Could we not do this at the railway tunnels? Can I suggest, Peter, that we can kind of incorporate these suggestions into the flood study? Is that okay, Peter?
Yes, sorry. I think
sorry,
yeah,
sorry about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll incorporate those into the flood study. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, a very useful question, saying, do SEPA and SAC have the ability to advise warnings as they may insist on better predictions of events such as this? I think perhaps one of the comments earlier on from colleagues was that there is an acknowledgement by SEPA that they are looking to try and improve the warnings in relation to these summer storm events. It's maybe not as an exact a science as perhaps they would like. If you compare it with some of their flood level warnings in terms of rivers, etc. So we are aware that SEPA are doing that study, and as you mentioned at the start, Peter, there's quite a comprehensive look into this, because this was a sort of Scotland-wide issue. So SEPA are looking at that, and we're awaiting the outcome of their study into that, so that might be factored into SEPA's activities. That would be great news for us, because as Stuart says, if we have 70 odd yellow warnings, it'd be really good to know which of those yellow warnings are actually sufficiently serious that we need to be getting ourselves geared up and taking action. Next question is, how can the level have stabilised if within the hour the whole area was flooded? I'm sorry, I'm not too sure what that one means. I don't know if any colleagues are clearer than me.
Keith, I think it's I'd said that our supervisor was out at 1 o'clock-ish back at 1:15 and cleared the hakes, and he left because they cleared the trash screen, sorry, and left because the river level had stabilised and everything was back to normal. And I think, obviously I wasn't in Perth at the time, but I think that the whole area flooded within an hour because of the volume of rainfall within that hour. I can't remember what it was, Peter, and I'm not wanting to put you on the spot, but in between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, was there not something like 63 millimetres of rainfall or something?
Yeah, that was round about the time of the peak rainfall, Stuart. So yeah, that was when it was really going off, unfortunately. Yeah.
So it was just down to pure deluge of water within that 1 hour period, coinciding with the loss of attenuation further up the catchment, and it just all came down.
Thanks, Stuart. Next question from a resident was saying the garden property was extensively contaminated by commercial lubricant oil from a garage, not covered by insurance. The question is, can they take out private prosecution of the owner to recover the high costs of reinstating the gardens? I'm not too sure as public officials we can give legal advice to people about private prosecutions. Unless anybody else wants to venture a response, I'm not entirely sure that's appropriate for us to comment on private prosecution matters. No, okay. Next question is, will the council now be asking homeowners to chop down trees next to walls onto the burn? I don't know, I'm not entirely sure where that one's coming from. I presume we won't be asking residents to chop down trees, Peter?
Not necessarily, Keith. I think we probably removed some during the recent works. There was one or two I know were in the bed of the burn itself. We've just cleared them out. It just depends on the situation, depends on the sort of risk assessment that we do. But no, we're certainly not looking for people along the length of the burn to be chopping down trees. I mean, trees can quite often be good because the root systems bind the bank together and give it a bit of stability. So we certainly don't want to lose trees in certain circumstances. What we do is just do an assessment of the burn and whether there's any obstructions in the burn that might cause a problem and reduce the flow that the burn can take. So if anyone's in any doubt, they can give us a shout and contact us on the generic email address, and we can come out and have a look.
Okay,
just to add very quickly there, sorry, Craig McQueen, there is a couple at Windsor Terrace which we'll certainly be keeping an eye on if there's further high flows, but we aren't arboriculturists, I guess, so we're not best placed to advise on whether trees or not should come down, but we'll be keeping an eye on them.
Thanks, Craig. Next question is, how often do we expect a person to check a wall? Person saying they've never looked at it in 30 years and will unable to go into the burn to check something like this. I'm not too sure that we would be expecting somebody to check a wall, Peter.
I mean, it's obviously your own private property. It's up to yourself how often you kind of check it over and maintain things. From our own side, obviously we're in the burn every 6 months and probably more often in between where we've got reports of issues. So if there are problems that we can see in the burn, quite often we do contact landowners and just point them out to them. But yeah, I appreciate for some people it's difficult. If you've not got an easy access, if it's not that visible, if it's underwater, it's not always apparent that there's problems there. But as I say, if we do see things that are obvious, we do let the landowner know.
Okay, cheers, Peter. Next question is, when will they be adopted? I'm guessing that relates to the persimmon activities. As you say, Andy, we've been kind of pursuing persimmon around that one, but it's contingent on persimmon doing certain works, which I don't presume that we can actually compel them to do that works, can we, Andy? So we are kind of in their hands, but I know you've been pursuing them around that one. Is there anything you need to add to that?
Yes, there's certainly been pursued on a number of different levels in regards to what needs to be done to their site before the council can fully take it on. I think also the planning side of things, I think Eddie Jordan's been chasing them on various matters as well. But we've certainly, as far as in regards to the actual culvert section and the trash screen that protects it, it's been some significant time since we gave them the list of work that would have to be carried out to make sure that what they've built complies with our safe operating procedures, and it's the right, for instance, size of bars, etc., that's been put in the screens and the adjacent platforms. To date, no communication has been received from them saying that they've actually started work to address the list of remedial works that we've given them. So we're still in this state of impasse with being in private ownership.
Okay, again, it's probably more informal than any legal requirement, but could maybe just go back to them and ask them what the state of play is with that. Just for people's information, Eddie Jordan's one of our colleagues in our planning service who deals with the kind of enforcement side of things. So maybe a wee concerted sort of effort by yourself and Eddie, Andy, just to see if we can get some movement from Persimmon on that one.
Yeah, I'll touch base with Eddie and see how far he got since his last communication that he copied me into, which was about 3 weeks ago.
If we can do, Andy, thanks, appreciate that. Next question comes from John about an early warning system put up at the Queen's Avenue flood contraption. Noticed a camera at this location. Andy, you've responded to say camera isn't a live feed, but we get a picture each day and we can ask for additional imagery. So hopefully that answers that question. Question from Meg with regard to Councillor Wilson's summary of action points. Respectfully ask when road gullies will be cleared of contamination and flood debris, and what is proposed with the boundary wall of flats at Low Road. And again, comments about the Bellway Persimmon developments being allowed to progress with no maintenance check. So I'll try and take them one by one. When the road gullies will be cleared, I think you've said that they have been cleared, Andy, and when they've maybe not been cleared, it's because of parked cars.
Yes, that's feedback from the gully motor operatives. They've certainly, any gullies that they've got access to, they have been cleaned. I see there's a comment further down. Can you not just put police no waiting cones out and the cars will be away the next day? Not always anything like as simple as that, but certainly do our best with putting out cones and signage, and 9 times out of 10 we'll come along the next day and find that there's maybe some cars being removed, but the cars that you really want to be removed are still there. So we certainly will do that. We'll try our best to get these cars moved by putting signage and cones out to get to the gullies that we haven't had access to so far.
Okay, cheers, Andy. There is a question about boundary wall of flats at Low Road. I'm not familiar with that one. Is that, Peter? Is that something you can comment on?
I can actually, Keith. I'm not sure what that's about. I don't know if there's anyone else on the call can help.
If there's not, we'll maybe ask the caller to just kind of catch up with us on that one offline, because we're not entirely sure of that one. And again, making comments about the lack of maintenance from Bellway and Persimmon, but we'll pick that up through what you were saying and doing, Andy. Councillor Wilson's made a point about Persimmon still have to reply to his email asking what they've done in the last 2 years. So again, we can, join forces in terms of speaking to them about that. A comment about very impressed with the work's done so far in the Burn Windsor Terrace is much improved. Thank you. So thanks very much for that comment. It's greatly appreciated. Said in Queen, next question saying in Queen Street, the employees wanted to take more out of the burn, but they were stopped from doing so to create a better job. Why was this not done? So it's suggesting that colleagues wanted to go further, but were told not to. I don't know if we've got that information that we can give an answer to that.
Sorry, Keith, Craig McQueen here, Perth and Kinross again. Just to say, it sounds a wee bit odd, that comment. If we went deeper, you would be at risk of further collapse of the walls as you undermined it. So that would be why we wouldn't want to go much deeper than what what work has been done. There's also sections of concrete in the bottom of the burn at either end which limit how deep you want to go. So going deeper wasn't really an option at certain locations.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah. Next comment, sorry, Andy's put some information just to support some of that commentary there. Question from Johnny, going to increase the tunnel size up at Queen's Avenue. Again, Peter, can we just kind of factor that into the flood study? All these comments are helpful that we can look into these items.
Yeah, we certainly look at culvert sizes and capacities when we're doing a flood study. Sometimes upsizing them can be of benefit, but you do have to remember that simply upsizing a culvert can pass flood risk on downstream, and in this location that might not be an option. So what we tend to do with flood studies is take a holistic view of the catchment, and if we're changing something in one area of the catchment, we have to fully investigate what the implications are upstream and downstream. So it's about trying to come up with solutions that are going to help everyone, really.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Next comment relates to the camera at Queen's Avenue, Queen Street Junction. Doesn't seem to be getting monitored regularly, or in fact cleaned regularly. Disappointed with this. Who's monitoring this? Andy, I think you've kind of mentioned about our monitoring regimes and things. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Certainly, there was a comment a while back. Someone asked if that automated trash screen cleaning equipment and cameras was providing good value for money. Well, I'd certainly say that the investment we've made there and other sites as well down the length of Craigie Burn, it does provide good value for money. It allows us to monitor remotely instead of actually physically have to be going out on site either during the course of a normal working day or in the middle of the night. It increases our speed of reaction because we can, as well as getting the automated warnings, we can set the warning level to give a specific warning in relation to how fast the water's rising. We can certainly get the men there quicker to clean the screens, and we've got to take into consideration as well that it's a safety factor to it as well. It's increasing the safety of the men that's on site. Instead of sort of leaning across with a long rake, effectively a muck hawk, and manually pulling material up the screen during times of high, fast-flowing water, they can just operate this automated like metal claw basically that pulls all the debris up to the top of the screen for them just to remove. So yeah, it certainly does. Just like to make the point that the investment that we've made does provide good value for money from the point of view of the safety of the operatives and allowing us to monitor remotely rather than have to physically go out on site and look up and down the length of Craigie Burn to see how levels are changing. Okay, thanks a lot for that. Next question, I'm conscious of time, we were kind of scheduled to finish at 8 o'clock, but I know there's quite a few outstanding questions, so bear with me. There's a question about if a wall was, back to the wall issue, if it was repaired piecemeal by residents, wouldn't that make the situation worse? But I think Craig's already said were the offers there to support residents in terms of any advice about rebuilding it. There's a question from John about sewage coming up through downstairs shower. Are Scottish Water SEPA looking into this? As we said, Scottish Water weren't about for the call tonight, but we can sort of ask John to contact Scottish Water. I think, Peter, keep me right here, I think they have a website where if people have had issues, they can make contact with Scottish Water because they want to know about these types of things. Yep, Keith, if people go into the Q&A that we put out or the flood bulletins that we put out, you'll find Scottish Water's contact details. You get straight through to them. Well aware of a few sewage issues that happened during the flood event, and obviously the council's been working with Scottish Water in the Perth Integrated Catchment Study to look at that and to look at the sewer network capacity issues within Perth City area. Okay, thanks, Peter. Next point relates to the gated Cherry Bank being the responsibility of Persimmon Homes and are other checks carried out. I think we've acknowledged that that's something that Andy is going to pick up with our Planning Enforcement Officer Eddie Jordan and pick up as part of the discussions with Persimmon. So hopefully that's responded to that question.
Lee's very helpfully put in the information for Carol and the Scottish Flood Forum, so thanks for that, Lee. Next comment is someone who works at Aviva, and often the burn at Cherrybank overflows onto the road. Is it going to be enlarged? Again, Peter, if I can just suggest that's something that we would kind of pick up on the flood study.
Yeah, absolutely, Keith, yeah.
Next question from her: has the planning response to development at Broxden been too piecemeal? Is there a need to revisit it on a more comprehensive basis? There's nobody on the call tonight from our planning service, so sorry, Ron, I don't think we can maybe answer that one, but we can refer that one to our planning colleagues to consider the point you're making. Next one was there's another question about the burn wall. How do residents get together to get that done? So Craig's given an answer to that one, and again, in the interest of brevity of time, again, I would suggest thanks for doing that, Craig. Now, there's a comment from John about dredging had taken place. The wall at the bottom of his garden had damage to it, which is caused by the digger's bucket scraping. Who takes responsibility for that? I'm wondering, John, if that's something we can kind of pick up offline. Would that be your own team, Peter, that would maybe respond to John on that one?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And you can email us through the generic email address. We can pick that up with the contractor, yeah. Yeah,
thank you. Comment from Mike: disappointed the council thinks it's doing a good job with high risk, etc., and the continuing failure of SUDS. I'm not too sure if we said we're doing a good job. We're doing the best we can with the circumstances we're in, and it was a very significant quick flood event. What we're saying is we're committing to a flood study of Craigie Burn area, so we can pick up any issues that people are flagging up. So we're committing to doing that. I think a couple of comments, I think, in relation to gully emptying, some suggestions I think we'll kind of take offline and consider. So something about councils dishing out a leaflet to homeowners to advise that gully emptying will occur. Please leave the street clear of cars. We can consider that one, and also putting police cones the night before, but we've kind of picked up on that one as well. And there was a question from a person saying, did you answer the question about residents being trained and able to close gates at the railway tunnels? Well, I don't know if there was something about residents being trained. I think it's a bit of a specialist role, but I'll maybe invite Andy or Stuart to come into that.
Yeah, I don't think we did answer the question, but the responsibility to operate the flood scheme rests with the council, and the liability rests with the council. And we've consulted our legal representatives some time ago in regard to that, and the advice we received legally is that it's better to remain under the control of the council officers rather than passing it over to residents to enact the closure themselves.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Stuart.
I think, as we said earlier on, Stuart, that we don't really want to see residents entering floodwater, particularly when it's fast flowing, and that's the kind of situation you might have if you're asking private residents to close floodgates. So that's something we want to avoid, I think.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I've noticed that Bobby's now closed the Q&A, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the conversation. It's possibly the end of the conversation tonight, but by all means, if there's follow-up questions from residents, from elected members, the contact details are on the screen there. I think I'd like to just, in closing, thank residents for posing these very diverse and searching questions. Thanks very much, elected members, for being involved. And also just a huge thanks to everybody who's given up your evening, including Mike from Scottish Fire and Rescue, Carol from the Scottish Flood Forum, and various council colleagues. So greatly grateful for all your contributions this evening. Hopefully it's put some more information our way, that we understand what's happened, and our commitments to taking action to make sure that any future incidents are minimised as much as possible. So with that, I'm just going to conclude the night's proceedings and say thanks very much for everybody for your contribution, and let's keep talking about how we deal with this together.